Some people will tell you that home is a place, but home really isn't a place at all. It's an idea. It's an idea, and you construct this idea out of a set of values and ultimately desires and wishes, the way you want it to be. And the stronger that is in you, and it's usually instilled by your family and the heritage you come from, the stronger that concept is of home, the more you're able to overlook and deny any of the negatives of the reality. Many people, in my opinion, have sacrificed incredible chances just to stay at home. Interesting. Some say home is where the heart is. I say home is where your hat is. I'll never forget that drive from that last gig with Jerry to Cape Breton. There was a massive amount of psychology going on on my part. So here's where I'm coming from. At that time, I was basically homeless for the previous 8 years. I was in and out of the States, not back to mother's place very often. She had been dead for over 2 years at that point, and which meant that there was no home to go back to at all in Canada. And I loved my life in the United States, and I loved the people around me, and I loved the music, and I loved all the freedom of the United States. America really is the land of the free. There's a ton of opportunity there for anybody who wants to work hard enough to gain it. And in those days, it was even better than it is today. So I loved that part, but now I had this woman who was willing to marry me, and she represented a bunch of things to me. First of all, she represented a fellow countryman. She was Canadian. Not only was she Canadian, she was a Cape Bretoner. And my entire lineage came from the town where she was born and still lived. And so the further I got away from the South, starting to head up through New York and Connecticut and just up I-95 all the way up through New York City, and the further north I got, the better I started to feel. It was bizarre. I'd made this trip dozens of times at this point, but it felt different. It felt like, okay, I'm finally going up here to, when I get done doing what I'm going up here to do, I will actually have a home. This is going to result in me, even if we pack up and leave and go move back to Alabama and I go back to work for Jerry and we do all whatever we're going to do, Hilda's going to be with me. It's a piece of my home. And then we've got 3 Canadians. We were all planning on living in the little. Me and Bob actually renovated the taxidermy shop. We turned it. We built a bedroom, a living room, kitchen area. We moved the walls around inside it so that Hilda and I could have a private bedroom. And Bob was sleeping on the couch anyway. He loved sleeping on couches, so he was there on the couch in the living room sleeping, and we just we set it up to be a home. So and it turns out that Hilda liked Bob. I mean, we're going to be getting into some touchy territory here because there's a lot of things that I could make some flippant observations about her, and I just won't do it. I'll just try to tell the story and make her her reactions and activities reflect what the important parts of the story. But for all intents and purposes, though, she ended up really liking Bob. I mean, everybody liked Bob, so. Anyhow, I'm driving, and finally I get to the border. It was way late at night, and my car was a mess, and I never forget this because I almost got friggin' arrested at the border because they found the wedding rings in the glove box, and the customs officer was like, "What are these?" I said, "Well, I just told you. I'm going back home to get married and await my work permits, and this is our wedding rings." And so the woman, kind of got a little hard ass with me and said, "Well, you can't take these into the country without you got to pay duty on them." And I had no money. I had enough money to get there. I had $200 or $300 on me. That was about all I had, and somehow I talked my way out of it. She was. Like they were going to literally detain me because they were saying, "Well, you lied. You said you had nothing to declare." I never knew I'd have to declare that, and I told her, I said, "Well, they're coming right back into the country. We're coming back to live." Oh, but that didn't do any good. But anyhow, at the end of the conversation, she finally relented and let me in and didn't charge me anything. Let me back home. This is Canada Customs. So I was lucky there, and I got across the border, and I remember, driving through New Brunswick, that long drive, and then down onto the peninsula and seeing the border of Nova Scotia. And the closer I got to Shetty Camp, the more this feeling was swelling inside me. Right, it was cathartic. It was. So, and then because I'd only been to the island once, and as I said in an earlier episode, I'd gone up there with the CBC with Glenn Meisner, and on a sound consultancy job that we were up there for one day, an afternoon basically, and back home. So I had seen my home place. I had seen Shetty Camp very briefly. This would have been around 1990 or 89 or 90, and. So here we are, it's 1994, and I think I'm a week or so away from the wedding, maybe. And so I crossed the Canso Causeway, and it just kept getting worse. Like I was so excited, and so I just had this overwhelming feeling that I was doing the right thing. So finally, I'm on that last long leg along the coast from Margaree up to Shetty Camp, and I've got the directions to her father's house. Now, here's where things start to get really weird. Uh, I didn't know this. I should have maybe known it because I had spent so much time in small towns that it should have been obvious. But Shetty Camp is possibly the worst gossip mill that I've ever seen in my entire life. And so it had gotten around everywhere that Hilda was marrying this guy so in their eyes at this time, I was from Nashville. That's where I was from, and I had worked for Rod Stewart. So they got it messed up. They got Rod confused with Marty. So I was some big star from Nashville who worked for Rod Stewart. And these people had never seen me, including Hilda's mother and father. So here's what I found out much after the fact, after getting there. Very few people believed that I existed. People thought that Hilda had lost her mind. And that, they were literally going, so when's JP going to get here? And I'm not kidding. That was really being done to her. And it was so bad that the woman that Hilda went to make our wedding cake built the goddamn cake out of styrofoam. There was no cake inside it. She frosted 3 or 4 styrofoam discs because she thought that there was going to be no wedding. So why put all the work into building this cake when I wasn't real? Now, I'm not making any of this up. Like, this is the truth. This is it, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing. I was, when I started to find all these things out, it boggled my mind. And unfortunately, it was another signal. I should have looked at that and went, why would these people think that Hilda's crazy, right? Nobody's that nuts that they invent some guy, right, that's coming up from Nashville that no one's ever met and no one's ever seen, especially in that small community. Like, who would make something like that? How crazy would you have to be that people would think you'd make that shit up? Like, so that was a trigger. That was a signal. That was a trigger. I should have looked at that and went, I think these people are not really telling Hilda what they actually think of her, and I'm sorry to say that, but it's obviously there's a problem there, and I felt bad for her. I was like, what the hell? Are you serious? Like, these are your people, but there was a saving grace. She had told all these people that I was the son of Paul Cormier. So in the French vernacular, they call people by their first name and then their father's name and then the nickname of the family. So I was J.P. Apolajaba Patush. So Paul, my father, Job, my grandfather, and Patush is a word that means little feet. And that's the nickname of the Cormier clan in Shetty Camp, is Patush. And every single name in Shetty Camp has a nickname. And it is real. Like they have a meaning. Like some people have a nickname that means stubborn, or a nickname that means, greedy, or a nickname that means whatever. And by God, I don't know what it is, but you meet those people with that name, and it's like, yeah, that's what they're like. And of course, I don't have tiny feet, but I got, I'm a big man and wear a size 9 or 10. And all the boys in the family are like that. They wear not 10 size 10s or 9s. And so it came from my my great 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 grandmother walked by the crib of my grandfather Job and reached in the crib and took his toes and went, ah, look at the little feet. Ah, Gerla Patush, right? And that's how the name started. So this is some interesting, like, we're going to get into all kinds of weird folklore like this. So, yeah. So I get there, and she's told everyone, that's the saving grace. Who is this guy? Well, he's J.P. Apollo Jabapatush. And my father was one of the most respected fiddlers that ever came out of that town. And his brother Joe, my uncle Joe Cormier, was one of the most respected fiddlers in the United States. He had moved, down to Boston in the 60s and had played for presidents and won awards and played Carnegie Hall. And everybody in that town all said the same thing. Well, your father, Paul, was the best fiddler that ever came from here. The only guy that they ever even mentioned in the same breath as my father was a fiddler from the island, from Shetty Camp Island, just across the harbor from the main street. And his name was Placid Odo. They called him T. Placid, Little Placid Odo. O-D-O. What a strange surname. But he was a famous fiddler there and, was born in the late 1800s. My father was born in 1921. Yes, in 1921. So I came from this lineage of people that it made sense in the Shetty campers' minds that I had left the country and went down to the States and had success as a musician because Uncle Joe had done it. My father Paul could have done it if that's what he wanted to do with his life, but he wanted to be a carpenter and raise kids, or he tried to raise the kids, and that's what he ended up doing. So there's sort of the whole background that I'm walking into. And the town is abuzz with this whole thing, and people are just, the gossip line, the rumor mill and the gossip line is on fire. And people are literally getting agitated about what's about to go down, on the 14th of September, 1994, right? And people are wondering if I'm real. Some people were really wondering. It's at this point that I start to meet people through my marriage to her, or impending marriage at this point, that are going to, become massive parts of my life. And some of those people are positive, some of those are negative. The first person I met was, of course, Hilda's brother, Gilles. She lived there in in one of the properties there had 3 houses on it, and they were all family homes. Her uncle Albert lived beside there, and then the main house Gilles owned, or at least lived there as far as I know, and then just behind it, 50 feet away in the back, was this poured concrete bungalow where her mother and father lived. So I met Gilles. Gilles is one of the nicest people that I've ever met. Funny, he's just a really good dude. And he had a dog, Black Labrador, who was named Flash. This dog would become quite important as later on. And great dog. So I pulled up, went in the house, started to kind of, decompress a little, and Hilda's like, okay, well, you need to come over and meet mom and dad. And I was like, I was nearly shitting on my clothes. I was like, because I knew that these people didn't know me. They had no clue what the hell was going on. And so went out of the house, walked, the 50 or 60 feet further down this little driveway, and there's this concrete bungalow with a blue roof and blue trim. Wall at the outside of the house, just raw concrete. And I would find out later on why the house was built that way. So we walk in, and I meet her mother and father. Now, her parents are a story unto themselves. Her mother, Julie, and her father, Daniel. As soon as I met Daniel, the only way to describe Daniel at that point in time, the man looked like a 5-foot tall Tony Curtis. Like this is a good looking man. He had thick black, Elvis hair, slicked back, and he was rail. The man might have weighed 100 pounds, and it was solid muscle. This guy, and he had this huge, deep voice. It was unbelievable how loud and deep this man's voice was for such a small man. When he spoke, it just echoed through the room. And he was a fisherman. And then his wife, Julie, was just sort of I don't know how to describe her. These people were never mean to me, ever, ever. And she was a real interesting character. She was very kind of rough around the edges and said exactly what she thought, and sort of a typical shetty camp fisherman's wife, But I noticed right away that there was a strange dynamic between them. They didn't get along well. If one of them said something, well, then the other one would just seem to always just snap at the other. And it would be an argument. They seemed to fight like cats and dogs continually. It wasn't like, if she said, "Did you take the garbage out?" Instead of going yes, Daniel would be like, "Well, goddamn, I told you it was," and that's how they communicated with each other. And it didn't freak me out because I watched my mother and father fight with each other for the first 8 years of my life. It wasn't, but this was something different. It was the way that they related to each other, and I was unaware of the history of why that was, and was really kind of unaware of everything about that relationship until years, almost a decade and a half later. So, anyhow, I was standing in this man's kitchen, and I instantly fell in love with this guy. He was one of the coolest people I ever met. And sat down at the table, and we lit a smoke and poured a cup of tea, and he was very quiet, and he kind of was looking at me, and he asked me some questions, and we were talking about, all kinds of stuff. And so Hilda and her mother ended up going, in the back of the house to do something. I don't know whether something to do with the wedding, probably something they were arranging, or clothing, or I don't know what they were doing, but they went off together down the hallway in the back of the house, and Daniel looked at me right in the eyes, and he said, "I hope you know what you're doing." And he's looking right at me, looking right, and he wasn't really a guy to do that for long, to stare you down, right? And it freaked me out. I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm okay. And he just went. He just shook his head and looked off at this, across the room, and I was like, "What the hell was that?" And so this was the dynamic, right, between these three people. And again, now, in Hilda's defense, I have to say this, and I'm not going to go into great detail. This is not a proper thing for me to do so. But Hilda's childhood wasn't easy. It just wasn't. She had a bad childhood, as many of the women that I've known in my life have had. She had a bad childhood, a really bad childhood, with all of the accompanying, scars that go with those things that happen to women and girls and stuff. And it's just, we're all just byproducts of our environment, and so was she. Sometimes, people are, wired a certain way, and those kind of traumas make it worse. And I think it did for her. I'm the same way. There's things that happen to me in my life that I'm wired a certain way that they had very long-lasting negative effects, especially, and it always seems to come out in your dealings with other people. That's where you suffer. When you've had a bad childhood, and that's where it rears its ugly head the most often. And but I still didn't see any of that in her then. It was still pretty not bad, like I didn't look at this and go, Jesus, I wish I should have just not come here. Because, on the surface, she was a lovely person. And so, anyhow, there we are. And I don't even know how many days it was until the wedding. It wasn't that long. It was only a few days, 3 or 4 days. And so, at this point, Hilda starts telling me about the fake cake and the, all these people asking her about her, in quotations, fiance, and I'm just, it's a lot to take in. There were so many things hitting me that, and I had driven, I just drove 3,000 miles, to come do this. And I'd made my mind up to do it, and I had the plan in front of me, and we were going to go back to the States. And even if I had seen something at that point, it was like, you better not do this. I would have done it anyway, because I was an idiot. And you're an idiot when you're 24. And because I really thought I had control of the situation, but I didn't. It's too bad. I didn't have control of shit. Everything kind of evened out there for pretty quickly in the first day. And the thing about Shetty Camp is that, because of where it was in my, my personal history with the town, I felt at home. Even though I didn't speak the language, there was a lot of people, even one of my aunts was afraid to talk to me because she didn't speak good English. And I had gone to see her, and people told me she might not talk to you much because she works in French. And so there were things like that. But I was around French enough up till then through different things I'd done and learned, whatever, that I understood languages didn't confound me that badly. And I could understand a lot of the things that were being said much more as time went on. And I never told anybody that. There'll be people right now watching this going, holy shit, he knew what we were saying? And yeah, But anyhow, so um, the it, it, the next okay, so the next person I went to see was my uncle Sam, Sam they called him, and he was my father's brother, other brother, and this man was instant hero as well. He was just he'd worked for the federal government mostly his whole life. His children were all very successful. One of them worked in CSIS. They were just all really like all of my cousins all became very successful people. It seemed that my father was the one that kind of got doomed in the family. He was a laborer his whole life, died at the age of 57. You know, had left a child behind in Shetty Camp. It was just he didn't do so well, really, compared to his siblings. So Uncle Sam was going to be my best man. So yeah, that was really cool, and I thought, geez, this is going to be awesome. And I didn't know where Bob or Joe. Well, I knew where Bob was, but I didn't even know where Joe was at this point. He was married by that time and living down in Bridgewater, and I didn't reach out to anybody that I knew to come to this wedding because, frankly, I had got there so close to the date that nobody would have had time to make arrangements to come all the way to Cape Breton to be part of it. So Sam ended up being the only person that I really knew at this wedding. And I got to spend some time with him, and he told me stories about my dad, and he told me stories about Uncle Joe and the rest of his brothers and sisters, and it was just a really special time. And another man that I met in this little bit of space before the wedding was a guy named Morris O'Coin. And Morris is to this day one of my best friends, and just a tremendous human being and a great guitar player. And his father, Jalos, was a great guitar player, and he had an instrument that would come into my life shortly thereafter during this story. And so it's a lot to recall. There was a lot of things happening, and but anyhow, another talent I discovered that Hilda had was she was a tremendous. Well, I kind of knew from the Ryman show because she had made her own dress for that show, but this woman built her own wedding dress, and it was spectacular. And she had sewed thousands of sequins on this dress, and lace, and like it was an impressive piece of work. And another reason why, another thing that people were saying, she's making that wedding dress and this guy doesn't exist. I'm like, what are you gonna do? So she had decided that well, here's another thing. Here we go. We're getting into a lot of weird shit here. They weren't going to allow us to be married in the Catholic Church. Boy, where do I begin? The reason they weren't going to allow it, because I wasn't Catholic. And as soon as I was told this, I immediately fell right back into the shoes of my father, who, as I described earlier in this series, was basically run out of Shetty Camp for not getting my mother to convert to Catholicism. And I thought to myself, holy shit, what is it? This happened in the 50s. We're 1994. It's like 40 years has gone by. And these assholes are still doing the same thing. Oh, you can't get married in the church because you're not a Catholic, and blah, 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 and you have to convert. And so Hilda wasn't a churchgoer, really. She was a Catholic, but she didn't know any more about the Bible or Jesus or any of that stuff than any other Catholic did. She didn't read the Bible. She didn't do anything. She just went along with the thing and did whatever that they do, which is repetition, call and repeat, right? So that's not much of a religion, really. I mean, I'm sorry, but these people didn't know even what they were doing, you know? They were just taking the word of the priest for it. So, but that's not their fault, and it's not Catholicism's fault. It's the way it was built from day one, so what are you going to do? Anyhow, I apologize if I offended anybody by that, but that's kind of the way I look at it from the outside. Anyhow, wouldn't let us in there. We flatly refused. Even when I went to see the priest, he basically told me to get out of his church. So, anyhow, Hilda decided, well, we'll have it outside, and we'll do it in the national park, because the Cabot Trail National Park started right there at Shetty Camp, and there was a place up on the side of the mountain in the Cabot Trail called Cape Rouge, and it was a tremendous look-off, like a cliff, hundreds of feet above the ocean. And so that's the spot. That's where we decided, or she decided, because I wasn't there when she was planning all this, and I thought, that's cool. So, sure enough, everything goes tickety-boo there, and I go down, the wedding day is coming, and the night before I take all my gear, my suit, and all that stuff, and I go over to Sam's house, because you're not allowed to see the bride. And so I spend the night with Sam. He cooks us a horrible supper, and he had one of the best lines I ever heard in my life. And he was a very proper man, and a tremendous vocabulary in English and French. And so we're sitting there, and one of the things that Sam was really good at, he didn't play an instrument, but he could whistle complex fiddle tunes note for note, as if he was reading it out of the book. It was that accurate. And he taught me a bunch of tunes that day and night. We sat around with the fiddle, and he was like, here's one, and he'd sing it, or whistle, diddle it, you know. And he knew where all the ornaments were, and he could sing these really complex tunes, which was amazing. It's just amazing. The man didn't play an instrument at all. And so we did that, and then at supper time he was very proper, and he used to clear his throat all the time. And he was standing in the kitchen, he goes, so, are you hungry? And I said, yeah, sure, I can eat. And he goes to the fridge, and he pulls out this big casserole dish, and he goes, this is a little chicken arrangement I made this morning. Chicken arrangement. I lost it. I had never forgot that. And he got tickled because I was laughing so hard about him calling it a chicken arrangement. And it was like a chicken casserole thing. And it was absolutely horrendous. It was the worst thing I ever ate. But I didn't care because it was him. And we ate the horrible chicken arrangement. And so the next day comes, and we go. Sam drives me. I drive up there, and I had forgotten to put gas in the car. It was my wedding day. I was a little bit nervous, so I forgot to put gas in the Oldsmobile. So I drove up to the park there. It was about 15-minute drive out of town. Hilda had some family friends of hers, which would have been actually Jerry Holland, one of the most famous fiddlers in Cape Breton that ever lived. His ex-wife and Hilda were very close, still very close friends. And her new man had this beautiful old antique Ford car, red and white car, and they were going to drive her up in it, which they did. And so, and I didn't even have money to pay for the justice of the peace. Sam paid her, or him. I think it was a man. I can't remember. Anyhow, I was so in shock. I didn't even know what the hell was going on. And it was an overcast day, warm but overcast, and it was a really, again, this word, surreal. And it was attended by all these people, that knew Hilda's family, her aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles and mother and father and brother, and all these people came, a lot of people, and we gathered out there on that cliff, and I felt, except for Sam standing right beside me, I just felt completely isolated. I was like, I actually questioned my decision at that point. As I'm pretty sure I think most men do get cold feet, but this wasn't exactly cold feet. It was something else. I looked around at where I was in the group of people I was in, and my brain went, are you sure you know what you're doing? And I almost went outside my body. I was watching all this happen, and vows were exchanged. You may kiss the bride. And at that very moment, when we were pronounced married, the world kind of joggled back and forth for a second. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like the timeline had changed, and I saw it. I could actually. That sounds a little crazy, but I swear to God, I was looking at everything, and there was a change in it. It was just like blah, blah, it's like the frame of the camera shook. And I was like, oh boy, I wonder what just happened. And so, kissed the bride, signed the documents, and everybody got in their vehicles, and we headed down to a place out in Marguerite called the Normaway Inn, which would become another incredibly important place to me moving forward over the next decade. And that's where the reception was going to be, where we'd get to see our styrofoam cake. And but before, on the way through town, one of the highlights of the day for me was, it was a Saturday afternoon. We got married, and there's a tavern in Shetty Camp called the Doryman. And for I don't know how many decades now, they've had live fiddle music in that tavern from 2:00 until 6:00 every Saturday for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. And on the way through town, I looked at Hilda and said, well, we're going to have to stop. And of course, she said yes. So one of the things that drew me to her was she wasn't afraid of anything. Matter of fact, she had more testosterone than any man I've ever met in my life. Balls the size of Volkswagens. And so we whip into the Doryman. It's about 3:00 in the afternoon, or 3:00, something like that, 3:30. We bust up in there, wedding dress, full suit, jump on stage, and Donnie LeBlanc, the house fiddler who plays when there weren't guests in there, we jump up on stage and play a set of tunes in our wedding gear. And of course, the place erupted. It was like, they probably still talk about that today. Us just blowing in there like madmen, mad people, and playing a set of tunes, and then we just pissed off and ran back out, waving at everybody, and we got in the car and left. So yeah, initially, the marriage had a bit of magic in it, but things would start to take a turn shortly thereafter. But as I go through this story, I'm really not going to fixate much on the marriage very much, but I'm going to have to, there's parts of the story that can't be told without discussing what was going on with that relationship. So just going to move forward through it as gently as I possibly can and just tell the story the way it happened. But there we were, left the doorman, jumped in the car, heading to Marguerite, and about halfway down there, I looked at the gas gauge and said, "Holy shit, we don't have enough gas to get to the place and back, I don't think." First argument. But we'll leave it at that. But another time, right, that the fiddle, became part of the myth and legend of my life, that the fiddle somehow, I don't know, just always seemed to pop its head up at the right times. An instrument that I don't think I'll ever really be able to get away from, even though in later years I really wanted to get away from it. But we'll get into that too. But that was an interesting day. Something I'll won't forget.